research and development nowadays is a collaborative effort with other disciplines, and but you need to awaken those instincts to immediately know the value that other disciplines bring to your work. You know, I never took an economics class. So I was like you. I did maths, physics, and chemistry for A levels. I didn't do any commercial subject for O levels. So I didn't know any of this. But later on in life, you suddenly realize, you know, you need a fully orbed or a comprehensive approach to your field, and you realize, you know, your field does not exist in a vacuum. So I just kind of want you to remember that, right? And just awaken, you know, have an appreciation, broaden your horizons. So we'll continue.
Okay. So the jacket is off. I don't think it's coming back on. I was just starting to sweat. I probably still will. So, okay, so we're going to continue on thinking about these areas. But since Reggie's mentioned collaboration, I hope that part of what I showed you this morning shows that it's okay for you to pursue your own self-interest. Your interest does include other people and your community members, so it's not selfishness. I'm definitely anti-selfishness, but self-interest is different. And so as you pursue collaborations, I hope what we'll start to do today is position you to see the win-win situation. The reason you collaborate is that both of you are going to win. But now what I've shown you is maybe something even different, is that through trade, even just working and trading with people you don't know or maybe you don't even like can lead to win-win situations. As long as things are voluntary, you got to keep grappling and figuring out how to improve things, and collaboration is certainly one way. But don't think that it's sacrifice. It's just looking for other avenues that might be a good path forward for you and your organization. Okay, so here is the index. So we've got 165 countries in the index. Not all of them are in there, like North Korea doesn't like to share their data. South Sudan is a troublesome one that we can't seem to get data on. But there's 42 different variables that are compiled into these 5 areas that we'll highlight again here on the next slide. And so we've got data over a large time period. 102 of them goes back to 1980, and then we've got more here recently. And so every country gets assigned a number. Numbers calculated somewhere between 1 to 10, or 0 to 10, and the higher number is the more economic freedom. All right, so size of government we mentioned in our rundown. So how much of the government, a different way of looking at it than what I explained yesterday or earlier with taxes, is how much of government spending. How much does the government make up of your entire economy? So your entire economy is gross domestic product. So that is the dollar value of all final goods and services produced within your nation over the course of some year. And what it reflects is your income. If we add up everybody's income in the nation, that's really what GDP is. And so how much of that is government spending as opposed to private spending? And so that goes back to what the notion of we can look at spending as well as taxes, because as you know, those two things don't have to marry up. The government has 3 options at its disposal to pay for spending. One is taxes. The other is inflation, right? So they can print off money to pay for it. And then they can also confiscate some of your stuff. That's actually the 4th one. The other one is to borrow. And so the United States is famous for this for the last 40 years. We don't collect enough tax revenue to do all the things that the politicians want to spend money on, and so we borrow money. So those are the 3 ways that governments must finance. Obviously, Zimbabwe isn't very credible on the world market in terms of taking out IOUs and borrowing, and so they resort to what you guys are familiar with. They print off money to pay for their spending, and that's what ultimately leads to that inflation. Okay, so legal system of property rights, sound money, freedom to trade, and then those regulations that we talked about, like with hair braiding and not allowing medium and small businesses to do their thing. All right, so this is a map of the world, but I'm actually going to put up the interactive one. So on Free the World, this is an interactive map that has all of the countries with the data on there. The other countries are there too. But it gives you a feel for economic freedom around the world. We organize the data in terms of the top 25%, the bottom 25%, and the two in the middle. So it's in quartiles. The most free countries are the ones in blue. United States, Canada, UK, Netherlands and those places, Australia. We've got a couple down here in South America, none in Africa, right here anyway, the mainland. And so because there's a long period of time with it, it's kind of fun to look at how economic freedom has changed over time. The good news is that I'll get into further is that the world is actually becoming a little more free. There's China, red China, least free, communist China. We see Africa starting to fill in. And then the world starts to get a little bit different here in the 1990s into the 2000s. We see China get a little more free. They take a little more market-based policies. And then we get to present day. And so we can see how this evolves over time. So the good news is that countries can change. These policies can change. There can be reform that moves this direction, but unfortunately it can go the other direction as well. And so with the interactive model here, we can look at their scores. So let's just start off. There's Zambia, there's Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe's 4.94, ranked 161. United States ranked 6. United Kingdom is 12. South Africa, and so you guys can go on this later if you start to get interested in some of this stuff. And there's data and all the calculations. Part of what I'm going to present to you today is the full data set is there. The researchers allow you to download an Excel spreadsheet. And so if you want to do other explorations of that sort of thing, you can. And that's part of what makes it nice is that it's very transparent. All right, so, oops, I was trying to do the presenter here. Okay. All right, so there's the map. And here's the top 10. So Hong Kong's been at the top of the list. Hong Kong as an economy, it's maybe some of you are familiar with the relationship to China. Hong Kong's going down, though. I don't know how far, but there's been major moves by mainland China to kind of reclaim a lot of what Hong Kong's done. But Hong Kong's been great. I was just speaking at the break about Singapore with a gentleman over here. Sorry I didn't catch your name. We'll catch you at the next break. Brought up Singapore. We have countries that don't have any resource base, but yet they've prospered and they've become higher income nations than even the United States in some cases. And so they, in 1960, looked like Zimbabwe in terms of how much income and poverty and other results. And so that they're one of the more dramatic changes, and it was through some of the things we're going to talk about today, strong rule of law and property rights, rule of law rather than rule by man, all that stuff that we got into earlier, they put into place. Okay, so I've picked off a select group. I wanted to include some African countries in here. So Botswana is kind of the shining star of Africa in terms of economic freedom, and of course in other ways too. They are ranked 45th in the world in terms of economic freedom. We've got Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya, so we're in the 80s. There's 165 countries. So those countries are right in the middle ground at 84 and 86. And then we move down the list into the least free, Congo and Zimbabwe, 161. So we got a lot of work ahead of us. All right, so there is the whole bottom 10, and it does include, unfortunately, quite a few African countries. So Central Africa Republic, Congo, work your way down the list. And I don't know, President Reg said, at least we got Sudan, yes. So I don't know what that means exactly, but he, if there's any real low consolation prize, that's it. So Sudan's there. And Venezuela has been the poster child of lacking economic freedom of what's gone on in Venezuela. Has been awful with death and destruction and everything falling apart, including hyperinflation as well. Okay, so, sometimes income inequality gets brought up a lot. And what would you think in general is happening around the world with income inequality? Is it getting worse or better in terms of the gap between rich and poor? Is it getting worse or better, income inequality? Less, worse, right? That's usually the case. And it's kind of shocking, but it's actually getting better country by country. And in large part, that's due to economic freedom. In fact, the data all points to that countries that were poor have adopted market-based principles. They've opened up their world to the market. Even in the case of communist China, they took on more market-based principles and engaged with the world and was able to trade with the world. And they have slowly pulled people out of poverty as well. And so there's been a 30% reduction over time, and it had nothing to do with international programs. So we talked about inheritance earlier as well. Those gifts from America, they suck. They don't do anything long term. I don't know if you guys have looked at this closely, but they, in large part, I would argue, and this can be debated a little bit, but they probably do more harm than good. They can, when we bring a bunch of shoes over, whether that's Tom's shoes or any other shoes, then we just put a shoe company out of business in Zimbabwe, right? We put a local business out that's making T-shirts or whatever. And so most of those gifts, of course well-intended, don't have the impact that we were hoping. And so international aid has been, in large part, a failure over time. As you guys know, when we set up a deal to give a country some money, unfortunately it has to involve the leader of the country, and they take the money, and then they promise it's going to go over here, new roads, new bridges, new infrastructure, and a lot of times that doesn't happen. If it does happen, sometimes it goes with their golfing buddy, right? And so they have their friends and their family, and that money channels into their friend-family network. And so it just does not work over time for a variety of reasons. Okay, so over time, though, what we've seen is economic freedom around the world has been growing. And so when we leave things in decentralized, organic hands of you individuals, we start to see some progress. We start to see people doing things that's best for themselves that then has these win-win creations for other local people. And so that ends up being a stronghold in reducing poverty. And what we've seen is that the richer countries have not been growing as fast as the poor countries. The poor countries that do adopt these policies grow faster. And so the gap between rich countries and poor countries is actually shrinking. That's great news, right? That we can see those sorts of outcomes. In general, I won't spend too much time on this, but I really don't give a darn about the gap between the rich and the poor. I think that misses the mark. I care about the poor. So imagine the rich and poor gap is here. It's a little gap, but we adopt market-based policies and economic freedom, and the gap grows to this big. And people say, oh, rich versus poor, the rich are taking from the poor, blah, 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 blah. But if you do a careful analysis of that, the countries that kept a smaller gap, the poor look like this. And so now look at the poor in the countries that are rich versus that adopted economic freedom, and the poor of the countries that haven't. The gap is smaller, but they don't buy as much stuff. They don't have as much food. They don't have as much medical treatments, right? They don't have the real things that allow for human flourishing and prosperity. Okay, so a little interesting economic experiment that I think highlights this. When Russia was the USSR, the Soviet Union, they broke up in 1991, and those countries, there was 25 of those countries of the formerly centrally planned, they kind of like, oh, no more Russia. What do we do now? How do we set up our economy? Some of them stayed with a more authoritarian type approach, right? Centrally planned system where we have the elites controlling the resources. And other of them listened to people like Milton Friedman and some others and said, let's set up something like the United States. So I'm not sure what it's going to look like, but let's take these ideas of economic freedom and put them into place. And here was the result that was really impressive in what economists call a natural experiment. You guys are all scientists, so when I say experiment, that kind of is easier for you than some of my undergrads who are still scratching their head. What does hypothesis have to mean? But here we had a natural experiment where we had countries that adopted those freedom policies and countries that didn't. And here was the change in the growth rates that was fairly significant the top 7 most free, medium, and then the bottom ones. And you might not think that's a lot, but I'm going to show you a slide later where this difference of a little over 1% of economic growth can have a significant impact on poverty and other incomes. And so it was just, again, another piece of evidence that these pathways of economic freedom can have a large impact. Okay, here's a little bit on the difference between rich countries and poor countries. In general, developing countries have been growing at 4.75%, high-income countries at 1.2%. And so that's the gap closing, right? So yes, we're rich, but we're not growing as fast. And so there's a lot of low-hanging fruit with adopting market-based policies that developing countries can take on and catch up a lot faster. So that's good news that we're not stuck, right? That would be the most depressing thing if we were stuck. So here's a look at income. So in countries that are most free, those top 25%, we have $50,000 of income. And those countries that are least free have an income per capita of $5,900. Now these numbers have been adjusted for purchasing power parity. What does that mean? It just means that we took a basket of goods and kept it even-steven between America and the United States. So if we say that Nando's is my favorite, by the way. I'm so excited we couldn't do it last night. But so we have a Nando's chicken leg is $1, right? Let's just say a Nando's chicken leg is $1. What this says is that in America, in an average most free country, this includes North America, is you can buy 50,619 Nando's chicken wings. Whereas in the least free countries, you can only buy 5,911. So it's really the purchasing power. That's all been equalized as best as it can across countries. And so this is a significant difference, 10 times the income per person in these countries. And more importantly, we can say if you take incremental steps, Zimbabwe, you can have some significant growth. This is double. This is 6,000 chicken legs. This is 13,876. That's double the food. That's real purchasing, real quantities of things, right? Just by coming and adopting policies that allow more economic freedom. These things don't happen overnight, by the way. This is a long-term plan, but we're going to show you some evidence of how it might not be too bad to wait. All right, so income's one thing, but I always tell my students I don't really think economics is about money, right? And that's kind of my chicken leg example. It's really about the goods that you're consuming, not so much money at all. And so here's something with life expectancy. Most free countries, least free countries. Is 15 years a lot of time? To have a little more time on Earth, is that a good thing? To spend with your family and friends and living life? 15 years. That's significant. And again, we see this pattern that you're going to see time and time again of countries that have more economic freedom live longer than countries that don't, even as we go through the process. Infant mortality rates. How many people like babies? I do. I like those little guys and girls. So, most free, least free. This is big. So this is per 1,000 live births. We've got 51 deaths versus 5. And again, we see the stair-step effect. So we have better health outcomes in terms of babies living more. And then this is where we get into the poor. This first slide just kind of shows how the fraction of the poor is similar around the world. So whether you're in the least free country or the most free country, the fraction of people that are in this poor shape, so to speak, financially with income, as measured by income, this is the poorest 10% of the population. So I like to think of this as kind of statistically, anyway, the poor of the poor, right? I mean, you're not doing too great if you're in the 30th percentile, possibly. But this is the bottom 10% in terms of income. So then, this is the telling slide. Where do you want to be in the bottom 10% if you were poor? We've got 14,000 chicken legs versus 1,500 chicken legs. Dramatic difference in poverty. And now, when we're talking this level of income, this is just, as you mentioned, hand to mouth, right? You work, subsistence living. This is significant. Our poor in the United States have refrigerators. They have cell phones. They have cars. They have a lot of material things that the bottom 10% here don't have. So if we're comparing the material things in life, which isn't everything, of course, but it helps you get on your feet, right? So $1,500 worth of income versus $14,000. So 10 times the income of the poorest of the poor, the bottom 10%. That's a significant element that comes about with this. Okay, this next slide was kind of depressing as I was preparing things. So what I've given this talk in various places, and so I've kind of collected that same slide that I showed you guys over time that was buried underneath the other ones. And so here's 2016, 2020, and then now 2021 is the one I just showed you. And look at the bottom of the bottom. $1,503. I know some of you might not be able to see that far. $1,558, $1,549. What's happening to the income levels of the poorest of the poor? Whoop! Flat, right? Now look at the poor in the most free countries. 10,600 chicken wings, 12,200, 14,004. So they are getting materially more better off by being a part of a country that has more economic freedom. Otherwise, you're staying pretty flat with no growth in material things that income can buy. Okay, so then a couple other ones here. This looks at the UN's measures of income and poverty. $1.90, kind of the $2 a day thing. $3.20, $5.50. $5.50. And so like what I like to tell my American friends is that when you go to Starbucks, or sometimes I call it $5, following Dave Ramsey stuff, your $5.50 Starbucks that you just bought for coffee that morning is what somebody made the whole day over here in one of these least free countries. But it's worse. It's 71% of the population. 71% of the population is living on that Starbucks. Right? And so this is really sad. This is where my heart starts to break and why I'm so passionate about trying to get this information out to the masses, because I've learned that when I give the information to the leaders, they're just like, oh yeah, we like freedom amongst ourselves, as President Reg was saying. We like to be free, but it's just me and my friends right here, not the nation, right? And this is how this gets out to the nation. And so we see the dramatic difference here in the most free countries. And so poverty reduction is really at the heart of this economic freedom. It's not about the rich becoming richer. It's about the poor becoming richer. School enrollments. This was a new variable that they threw in on this last report that I wanted to include because we were talking about schooling. So look at the difference in most free versus least free. So primary education, 81 versus 96, which might not seem a lot, but there's a lot of kids in that statistic, right? 81 versus 96, the incremental difference of 15%. And then pretty dramatic difference here with secondary education, especially even as we go from least free to the third free, big difference in education levels. Part of what, of course, you all in your places know is important, but how can we get it out to the masses so that we don't know who's left behind? That person could come up with the next technological advance, but they really never got a shot for various reasons, right? By having a country that's more free, we're probably squeezing out everybody, honestly. There's not too many people left behind. If you're really talented in the United States, you're probably going to rise through. There's lots of evidence. Some students that are, one of my students that went through my capstone, she had some pretty bad circumstances with her family, and she was basically raising her sister. And so we have those stories in the United States too. But you tend to have a lot better chance of percolating to the top with the systems that we have in place because of the economic freedoms that we have. Political rights and civil liberties. So where does democracy live? On average, it tends to live more in more free countries than least free countries. I tend to find people hang their hat too much on democracy, though. Democracy is a necessary but not sufficient condition for having good outcomes. But a lot of times people, we got to bring democracy. We got to overrule this dictator or whatever. If we go back to maybe some of the leaders over here in Africa or in other places. We got to take them down and bring democracy. Well, turns out you need more than democracy, right? And so the U.S. has found themselves in a pickle many times where they're able to bring democracy, but what about the other 5 components and all the other issues that you need? That turns out to be a lot more complex to deliver. Okay, and then gender. I'm going to spend a little more time on this with some other things, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but basically, where do you want to be a woman? Well, the gender inequalities are greater in least free countries as opposed to most free, and again, you see the stair step where they improve as you move up the freedom levels. Happiness. Believe it or not, economists try to measure happiness, right? So where are people happy? This is kind of one of those fuzzy statistics, but it's a self-reported happiness on a scale of 1 to 10. You know, how do you think you are in your life? So they collect data on that. All of this data, by the way, is from external sources. So this was from the World Happiness Report, United Nations. And so we see that people are self-reporting higher levels of happiness in places where there's more freedom than when there's less freedom. All right, so I've already hinted at a lot of this, I think, already, but what's holding Africa back? Why does Africa look like there's a lot of red and a little bit of amber and a little bit of this green here? What can be done to help out Africa? All right, so I wanted to help put Zimbabwe, since we're here, kind of in its place relative to other areas. And so the first bar over here is Zimbabwe. I highlighted earlier that they scored a 4.94 on the overall index. This is an average of the whole 4th quartile. So all the least free countries, these guys are worse. That's why they're ranked 161, right? So they're a little bit less than that. And then I put the world average. The whole world is 6.93. If we just average all the scores around the world, we're at 6.93. And then I thought I'd throw the United Kingdom in, just to give you a reference point with one of the most free countries. What do they look like? And so that is kind of an overall summary that I'll do as I go through the next slides of having Zimbabwe, the 4th quartile average, and the world average in the United Kingdom. Okay. So here are the 5 areas, each one individual. And so again, what I've got here is the 5 areas are the blue bars for Zimbabwe. Size of government, legal system, sound money, freedom to trade, regulation. And so these all represent the individual 5 scores for each one of those areas. The overall score of 4.94 is just a simple average of those 5 numbers. Add them up, divide by 5, and that's your 4.94. Okay, everybody with me there? You don't have to perfectly remember this. Again, there's not going to be a quiz at the end, but I want you to kind of get a feeling that there's a lot of complexities that go into measuring this. This isn't just some kind of simple thing. There's a lot of things going on. And so the least free countries are significantly better in some of these areas. One that jumps out, of course, was the inflation I talked about before. That's the gray bar. And these are the least free countries, right? But across the board, in the least free countries, with the exception of legal system and property rights, so there's a little bit of hope there that there's some things in place that I'll explore a little bit more later compared to the rest of the world. Otherwise, not as much. We have a little bit on freedom to trade. So relative to your other least free countries, you're a little bit higher, just a little bit above. So that's a good thing. A lot of times, unfortunately, authoritarian type regimes know that they have to rely on the international trade because there's not enough activity here because of their mismanagement. And so opening up to trade is one way to do that. And so that's kind of evidence in China and in Russia. We were talking at the break again about energy being traded and that sort of thing. So world averages and then the United Kingdom, just to give you an idea with those 5 areas. Okay. So that's the rankings around the world. I put United Kingdom here as 24th with sound money. Those are the rankings for Zimbabwe out of the 165 countries. So nothing makes the top half, which is really a statement. None of those 5 areas make the top half. The best thing is in our regulation, anyway. The best of the worst, I think, is probably the best way to phrase that, at 119. Is where Zimbabwe is on that stuff. So, government investment. One of the areas, so remember there's 42 variables that are being compiled with all this, so I'm just going to unpack a few of them. This kind of surprised me. So government investment is, how much investment does the government do versus private investment? So countries with more government enterprises and government investment receive lower ratings. Now you might be thinking, Russ, you forgot to put the bar up here. I didn't. That was the computer-generated response. It's 0. It doesn't get any lower than 0. You have way too much of that going on in Zimbabwe. Look at the fourth quartile. It's here. That's all the other least free countries. So, somehow being able to get the government out of the decision-making is one of the key elements in a lot of ways. But that was just one that jumped out at me. So here's that property rights. Judicial independence, impartial courts, protection of property rights, military interference in the rule of law, the legal system, enforcement of contracts, regulatory restrictions on the sale of real property, and reliability of police. So again, United Kingdom, this is the world average, least free countries, Zimbabwe. We see that same pattern. Now, here I put kind of good because I wanted to give some hope that there's some that, there are some elements that Zimbabwe's scoring a little bit better on some things, but not very many of them. And so part of the reason this is good is it kind of pinpoints areas that could be beneficial. If I had to give a recommendation on policy changes, we could use this as a tool to say, let's not spend our time here. Maybe we need to spend our time here, right? Where it's relatively not as good relative to other countries. There might be some benefits to making reforms that way. Okay, so these are the ones that were a little bit low, and I just wanted to give you guys a feel for what goes on with these questions. And this might resonate with you. You can think about your country, whether it's Zimbabwe or other places. How would you answer this question? This is what the survey does to the UN and other parts. The legal framework in your country for private businesses to settle disputes and challenge legality of government actions and or regulations is inefficient and subject to manipulation. So you rank a 1, you rank a 7, and there you go. And so here, you guys are pretty even with that. Law and order, how impartial is the legal system? We're just gathering what you guys are saying. This isn't some expert doing something. That's kind of the point I want to drive, is that this is the people speaking in a large number of these categories. Time cost. How much time and money is required to collect a debt? Right? Is it easy to engage in contracts? And then finally, to what extent can police services be relied upon to enforce law and order in your country? Right? And you rank that. So you guys think about that. If I'm in trouble, are they going to come relatively quickly or not? And obviously, the data here says that here's the average for the world, and here's Zimbabwe. So again, we're starting to point out some areas of weakness that you guys might have already known they're weak. Like, duh, right? I've lived here forever. I know that that's an issue. But now kind of putting these things together, we can see how important they are overall for a country's prosperity. Okay, so with legal system. Fixed terms contracts, permanent tasks. I brought up the level of investment that goes on. How can we have economic freedom? You, as an investor, to start a business, you're thinking 10, 15, 20 years down the road, right? I'm going to work this business. I'm going to take time to hire the right people, get them in the right place, and that is difficult when we have rules changing on us. Are there restrictions on hours? So here, Zimbabwe is a little bit better than the least free countries. So in other countries, and the reason I bring something like this up is that if the leader of Zimbabwe comes out and says, I got a great idea, let's ban firing. I want to lower the unemployment rate. So we're just going to say you can't fire people. That's brilliant. No, it's not. It's stupid. India's tried it for years, right? It has unintended consequences of not the least of which I think would be the workers that do keep their jobs. They don't have much incentive to work very hard knowing that they can't be fired, right? So you, again, as an entrepreneur, it's hard to find a good workforce and to utilize resources to their highest and best use. Mandated work. So do you have to hire them a bunch of money to when you do fire them. Again, all of these things sound humanly right in some cases, but don't make a lot of business sense. And so maybe we can have other institutions in place in our country instead of relying on a business to fork over a large sum to somebody that they want to fire. We have maybe a social safety net like we do in the United States of some sort of unemployment insurance, right? So we come up with other ways to protect people at that human level until they can find another job. So business regulations. How hard is it to start a business? So in the United States, I was involved in real estate. I guess I didn't get a lot of my background, but I had a number of limited liability companies, a little restaurant business, an equestrian center, and different things that I've started on and off. I haven't been a kindergarten to PhD professor. I was out in the real world. And so when I moved to Kansas for my full-time job, I got involved with a couple properties. I mostly tried to get out of that, but it took me 45 minutes to start my business. I was able to be an official, legal entity of the United States of America in 45 minutes. Now, I think I knew what I was doing because I had set these up before, but even a person who was starting fresh, maybe an hour and a half, a couple hours, and you have a legal business with a tax identification number, I could start selling tomorrow, and I would be legal within the system. In other countries, that could be 180 days, right? Oh, you must go to this office to secure this license from this person. And of course, if you don't have, if there's a stack this high, you go to the bottom. Unless, of course, you have some good old greenbacks that you can put under the table to move up the line, right? And so it's not very easy for people that are disadvantaged economically to be able to improve themselves because of elements like that. And so Zimbabwe suffers there. Again, this is the least free countries. There's Zimbabwe, world average, and the United Kingdom. All right, so there's the time measured. Capital requirements, how much money needs to be deposited in a bank account. So imagine that the government has some rule that, anybody can start a business. You just have to have $5,000 deposited into the bank account. It's kind of a deposit because we want to know you know what you're doing. It's like, what? I don't have that, right? And so all those little steps, regulations, end up being barriers for people to start a business and can be detrimental. All right, so Zimbabwe was ranked 151 in this particular category, and so I wanted to end with here with nepotism, cronyism, discrimination. All of that is alive and well in a country that has corruption running rampant. And Zimbabwe is not alone. There's lots of other countries, unfortunately, in that category. The idea of cronyism, I like to have my students know, big business and big government playing kissy face. I love you. Yes, you give me some money, I give you some money, and that's the way the world works. That's not capitalism. That's not markets. So when people say something like, oh, well, we don't want capitalism and free markets because that's just corporations and that's the rich getting richer, and that's because that's not competition. You know, you can't have favoritism with the government. That's not a competitive, healthy marketplace that helps keep greed, if it is, in check, right? If there's other competitors that can emerge, then that business can't do anything. But if it's the leader's golfing buddy that runs the business, and he made a law that this is the only person that can provide that business, and they're like, oh, we're free market, right? We have this business. It's not the government, I promise. We just go golfing on Saturday. That business is not capitalism. That is not markets. Just because it's individually, privately owned, and it's not owned by government, that's not markets, right? We need that guy challenged by other people that say, I can produce that product better than that guy can produce that product at a cheaper price. And then they have the opportunity to compete. And then that guy has to lower their prices, and they have to lower their prices, and before you know it, we're down to a fair price, even with fair profits being made. But you need a competitive, healthy environment where economic freedom is appreciated and encouraged. Okay, had to come back to sound money on this one, just to kind of show you over time. This bottom one, as you may have guessed, is the lower scores, is Zimbabwe. And so we had some improvements. The reason I wanted to bring this up is these other countries, I put in your neighbors. So we got Botswana, Mozambique, South Africa, and Zambia are these other colors. And part of the reason I wanted to put this up here is just to show how stability of money has contributed towards economic freedom, whereas this erratic up and down and low scores really erodes the base. I mean, it's hard to take a step forward when that's what you're facing here in Zimbabwe. And so I hope that can change over time. All right, so here we've got the freedom scores of Sub-Saharan Africa, Botswana, and South Africa. And so over time, we've seen some increases, but Botswana, back in the 80s, was above South Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa in general. And so they made some dramatic reforms and scored higher. So I've heard, it might have been John Stanko earlier, I had to correct him, I'm sorry, I love John, but he kind of gave the, I talked about Botswana, he's like, I got diamonds. Yeah, that's why they're so rich. They're doing so good. They've got resources. And so I kind of let him say his piece, and I just, respectfully said, that's really misrepresenting the truth. And the reason is that there's lots of countries that have rich resources. Look at Venezuela, right? Venezuela's in shambles. They're the most oil-rich country in the world, right? So it's sometimes called the resource curse. And so a country can be rich in resources, but if those resources are controlled by elite groups or the leader of the country, they don't have to share them, that can be really detrimental. So if you don't have the other things going on in markets that can make it competitive, where ultimately those resources, the diamonds, if we go back to my picture here with diamonds and food, yes, those diamonds can make more food, right? So resources are good, but not unless these other preconditions are in place as well. And so Botswana did some significant things that we do not want to overlook. The impact's been huge. This one especially here, Botswana, this is Sub-Saharan Africa. And so right here, guess who was worse back here? This is Botswana, right? So Botswana was in worse shape than the average Sub-Saharan African country. And they made some changes, and so we started to see this, and they eventually crisscrossed, and then we go up. And so this is now in per capita income. The rest of Sub-Saharan Africa has been flat, just like we were showing earlier at that 1,500 level, whereas Botswana now is up in that, this one, 7,000 range. Right up with South Africa is that top line there. So South Africa has been fairly flat. And so their income's been fairly flat because there hasn't been a lot of improvements in economic freedom, and there's been some other problems. So I mentioned the 1% growth rate thing being a big deal, and so a nice little rule of thumb that some of you might be aware of is the rule of 70, sometimes called the rule of 72, but it's really just an approximation of the relationship between the value of something and the rate of growth of something. So we planted those little trees at AIBST yesterday. Those of you, how many AIBST people do we have that planted a tree, right? So imagine if the tree growth rate is 10% per year. We're starting from where we started with little saplings. And so how long will it take the tree to double in size? 70 divided by 10 is 7 years. So in 7 years, it'll go from this height to this height. It'll double in size every 7 years. And so it's kind of a nice approximation that can be used for inflation or other things. You just simply take 70 and divide it by whatever that rate is. Well, now when we're talking about real people with real stomachs and real babies and real houses, that can be a big factor. So if we have a country at $10,000 worth of income, and we would take a 30-year time frame, here's 1% growth, here's 2% growth. And again, this is 5,000 chicken legs, right? We've kind of kept all of that constant. And then if we get up to 4%, it's 30,000 chicken legs. And so having policies in place that allow more growth can have a significant impact on poverty. And finally, we get to Botswana versus Zimbabwe. So this is fresh data. I went to Fred. Fred is the St. Louis Federal Reserve, so they collect data from all over the world, including domestic variables. And so it's really easy to get a graph going. And so in 1982, right here, Botswana and Zimbabwe were at 1,054 and 1,073. Even Steven. And that's 1,054 chicken legs, remember, right? Everything's been accounted for. And now, through the changes that they did, we have in 2020, even with the COVID crisis downturn, Botswana 6,400 and Zimbabwe still at 1,200. So we've seen that play out over time, how detrimental these policies. That's 5.2 times the amount of consumption per person that's available in Botswana versus Zimbabwe. Okay, let me pause there. Before I get into the women and economic freedom part. Any questions? I know I've smothered you, and I'm not even done yet. I've smothered you with details and data, and any questions? Yes?
Yeah.
Oh, I'll come back.
A lot of times people think a lot of emphasis on the difference in growth rates between developing and developed countries. But is this not expected, given that, for example, a lot of developed countries talk that they do the R&D development they want, whereas developed countries say just typically how the work also is done.
Yeah, so the question was developing countries versus developed countries and the differential growth rates. I've struggled now, especially even after putting these slides together, that I hesitate to call you guys a developing country. I don't know if that sounds rude or mean or something, but if it stays flat for 30 years, you haven't been developing, right? I mean, really, it's a stagnant country in terms of economic growth, in terms of prosperity per person, in terms of the poor, in terms of even the rich or whatever, depending on, well, the rich are probably getting, in this case, the elite groups their growth path might be like this. But, so, with the growth rates difference, there's been some interesting studies where they took two developing countries. And so if you just and that's kind of what I did a little bit here, and look at the growth rates between the two, having those policies in place versus not having them in place. So it's not a matter of, I'm already rich and it's easier to get rich. If I'm reading you right, that's kind of what you were saying, right? How can I be poor? Well, we take countries that are in the same category and we see that divergence happening, where more freedom has created more prosperity. And so that's a little bit of what I was talking about with I don't care about the gaps too much. If the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, I just care about, are the poor getting richer, right? To focus in on the actual consumption levels of the poor and not worry so much about the rich. That's another question back here?
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, I would like to find out, are there countries in the world where economic freedom is quite low and yet...
Where economic freedom is
low, and yet they are doing very well economically. So I say this, I'm looking at some countries, like United Arab Emirates. I'm not sure whether economic freedom is very high.
Yeah.
But still, you will see that they are doing extremely well economically.
Yeah. So there are a few cases. So there's kind of two parts to the question. The first part is that, I said earlier, this economic freedom takes time. So I gave a talk in Guatemala. Guatemala is in the most free category. And I'm like, I looked at their average income and it's 5,000. You know, why does Guatemala have so many poor? And what you learn after you dig into it is that you have to have these areas working together. And so in Guatemala's case, unlike you guys, I'd be interested to look to see if it works. It probably is. Their legal system and property rights is awful. But they have super sound money, unlike you guys, right? And then also freedom to trade. So they score really high in some other areas and really low in others. And so it kind of brings to the thought that these all things it's a complex thing. We don't have one necessarily as important as the other, although I think legal system and property rights is right up there. But they kind of work in harmony. And so we need that score to work out. We can't be too lopsided of really good in 3 categories, but awful in 2. That might mean really poor outcomes. There are some countries that are strong in some areas but weak in others, so their economic freedom rating is lower. And I'll share with y'all. I'm sure we can send emails out to everybody in attendance of the whole data sheet and some of my slides and some other things that you could explore other countries, because we can go on the map like I was doing and look at some of the countries you're talking about and look at their income levels. So we do see some that have less freedom but higher incomes. So that's possible, but not as high as the most free countries. And so it's, again, kind of a complex thing. Some are, this is a long-term project. It might be 10 years before you start to really look at what happened with Botswana, right? This is 2020. There's 2000. That's 20 years. And then we're back to 1980. So it's taken 40 years for this result to emerge. And so we have to allow time for generationals to change, right? Your kids thinking differently about how the world works. The culture of inflation, of you guys dealing with that all the time. Has it gone 10, 20 years with stable, sound currency? And it's like, well, now your kid thinks, oh, why not start a business, Mom and Dad? Oh, it's too risky. No, I think I've got this, right? And so culturally, there's changes that go on. And so that can take a long time. And so sometimes the results look different that way. Okay, any other questions before moving on? Yeah.
Mine is really difficult to comment on this. You'll probably have people saying things like, whilst we say maybe people like Elon Musk are the richest in the world, it's because of their wealth is in recorded structures, or structures that they can actually trace.
Okay, formal markets versus informal markets.
And if you go into the Middle East, you'll probably find 20 people that are richer than Elon Musk, but you don't see their wealth written in formal structures. So when you come into economies such as Zimbabwe, Kenya, Uganda, I mentioned a couple of African countries, it's highly informal. So good example is you can pick somebody in here with an income of $1,000 that they get from their paycheck, which pays you in.
Yeah.
But that person has got 7 other income streams that's different than probably he has.
Yeah.
And over and above that, there are million other side hustles that don't pay taxes,
Yeah.
but are also held as cash economy.
Yes.
So when you look at that kind of a structure, how does it then speak to these statistics? Because I like to believe that these statistics don't take into account
Yes.
that kind of work.
Yeah, you're correct. Although there's studies that look at the level of informal markets versus others and estimate what that informal market is. And so then you're able to compare, let's say, similar economic freedom levels between a country with less formal markets versus more formal markets and look at the outcomes. And we can see how bringing things above board can lead to more prosperity and higher incomes. To get back to your Elon Musk question, so I guess you mostly said that around formal markets, and it's true. But I don't want to forget, there's some people that are rich because they've taken money essentially from other sources, right? In some way, shape, or form. And maybe in some of the countries that you were just speaking, the informal market is where they earned their money. And so the thing that's interesting about a person like Elon Musk is that they've continued to serve the community. Now that might seem weird to you. What? He's the richest guy in the world. Well, how did he build his wealth? He just thought of things that added value to your life and to your life and to your life, right? So again, he profited, but you profited off of the things that he came up with, which was kind of right at the beginning where we started. And so having things in formal markets allows greater growth is what some of the studies have shown. So yes, informal markets get estimated, but of course it's very difficult to do. And so is the average person better than what we're showing here? Probably, right? Through informal markets, maybe it's here is part of what you're saying. But what the studies show is that yes, you're here through informal markets, but here's where Botswana is with informal markets you're here, but here's where Botswana is with more formal markets, higher percentage of formal markets, right? And the beauty of the market system is that it allows you to have impersonal relationships, right? And so in the informal black market, you have to work deals with people that you know, and you have to trust them, and are you going to deliver the cash, and are you going to do this, right? You have to go to more trouble, in a sense, right? But if I'm a formally recognized business, I can sell to people I don't know, and my reputation, possibly through some legal structures that the government has created, but also just because my reviews get posted with 5-star ratings and I serve my customers well, it allows me to do deals with people I don't know. And that's the real advantage of formal markets versus informal markets. And it allows countries to have more people prosper in general than places where there's large informal markets. Okay, anything else? All right, I want to play a video. It's just a 1-minute video. And so we're going to shift gears a little bit into women and economic freedom. And let's see if I can find this here. It seemed to work earlier.
Economic freedom, the ability of individuals to make their own economic decisions. What to buy, where to work, whether to start a business or engage in trade is key to economic and social progress. But in many countries, women have less economic freedom than men. They can't live freely within their country. They face barriers to property ownership. They are often forbidden to have a bank account, obtain a loan, operate a business, or even work at a job. In countries with high levels of economic freedom for women, women are more likely to work and are more than twice as likely to have a bank account. Enrollment in school for girls is much higher. And crucially, in countries with high levels of economic freedom, women live longer. Clearly, as economic freedom rises, the lives of women improve. To learn more, visit womenandprogress.org.
Okay, so we've got lots of nice outcomes that come about from having, in general, more economic freedom, even among the sexes. In terms of, oops,
This program
I
is
did
part
not
of a series
stop.
of podcasts doing in-depth interviews on
Okay, maybe I'll listen to you later. No idea which one that one is. Okay. So, this little section, it's kind of the same thing, least free countries versus most free countries. But we can look at differentials between men and women now in these various categories. So life expectancy, women in general live longer than men. So 82, when I gave you the statistic before, it was a blending of male and female. And then there's the difference in the least free countries. So we see those same results among women. Maternal mortality rates, so more women dying with childbirth in least free countries versus most free countries. Babies again, infant mortality rates that we looked at earlier. And then now we'll get into a little more medical stuff that I thought would be interesting to look at. So percentage of deaths due to communicable diseases, as well as nutritional, maternal, and prenatal conditions. So a lot better shape in the more free countries. Hepatitis B immunizations, so significant difference in least free countries versus most free. Immunization rates. So the pattern remains. Again, this is pretty similar here. So one thing is there's a pretty significant jump just by having some of those changes in place on getting people healthier. So again, this is where it gets a lot more beyond just money. So rate of persistence to the last grade of primary school, we see better results. Notice with men and women in most free countries, pretty equal there, right? Basically, probably statistically insignificant. And we see the gender differences in the least free countries. Oops, let's see if I hit this one. Share of youth not in education, employment, or training. So the youth are in a lot worse shape, especially the women. Pretty significant difference here of 28 versus 14. A lot more equality in the lower free countries. Labor force participation, who's in the workforce? So this is just of people who want to work. Are they engaging in work? So women in least free countries do not engage in the workforce as much. Might be a lot of informal work, as the question was earlier. That wouldn't be picked up here. Unemployment rates higher for women in least free countries. Advanced education. So now as you become more and more educated, what does the unemployment rate look like? And so women, again, more disadvantaged, 14% relative to men. So men who continue their education in least free countries are going to tend to be more employed than women in those countries. And population age 15 plus with ownership of financial. So do you have a bank account? And so that was mentioned there again. Pretty much equality or close to equality here in the most free countries. There's probably countries like in this most free, I mentioned Guatemala earlier, so that's what brings down some of those averages. There might not be as strong a results there. That's not all those countries. And then some good news for Zimbabwe. This was the gender inequality disparity index. And so again, it's better outcomes in most free countries, but Zimbabwe has improved. So there's been a positive change in terms of gender equality for Zimbabwe, and then those other African countries there also all had incrementally positive changes. But you can see some of them have a long ways to go. Here's Sudan. Yes, woohoo, we went up by 0.01. So yes, it went up, but the score is super low, right? So Zimbabwe, you actually had a pretty high score, and it went even higher relative to other places. So this is kind of an interesting way to dissect gender issues among the countries. Okay, so then we had some good quotes yesterday towards the end of the talk, so I thought I'd put this, one of our founding fathers of the United States, Thomas Jefferson. The sum of good government is a wise and frugal government, real efficient, which shall restrain men from injuring one another, shall leave them otherwise free to regulate their own pursuits of industry and improvement, and shall not take from the mouth of labor the bread it has earned. So that's part of what the United States was built on. It was, you'll hear lots of people talk about it being a total experiment, right? In 1776, when the United States laid out its Constitution, they were tired of the Brits. You guys were tired of the Brits at points. Everybody was tired. A lot of people around the world were tired of the Brits, right? And so we wanted to do our own thing, and they recognized that the world had been ruled by kings and queens and elites forever. And so the United States said, let's do it differently. Luckily, we had some people like Thomas Jefferson and others that had some foresight to say, and they knew their history, right? They knew what these regimes had looked like for the last 2,000, 4,000 years and wanted to do something different. And so what they did is they set up a situation where we're going to allow people to make individual decisions. And they do what's best for themselves rather than what I think is best for themselves. And the result is what we have is one of the most prosperous places in the world. And that has led to other places adopting some of those freedom policies as well. Okay. Let's see. Are you guys itching? What time is it, Reg?
It's 11:42.
11:42. All right. I think I'll do one thing, and then we'll take a short break to just try to use the facility. So give me a little bit more time then to transition.
Yeah, then before you transition.
Question?
I wanted to look at the graph to do with life expectancy between gender.
Okay.
Yeah, for the least free country.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Let's see, that was one of the first ones. This one? Life expectancy from birth. So is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah.
So the 82 for most free countries. Women, this is women in most free countries, and then 67 in least free countries.
To me, that's quite paradoxical in the sense that for the other graph that you showed me is that actually in terms of unemployment, in terms of education, men are doing better, but when it comes to life expectancy, yeah.
Oh, here, yeah. I think ultimately, my guess is that it boils down to genetics. I don't know. You guys are the doctors and scientists out there, but I'm thinking when you get into here, both men and women in the United States have had pretty equal access to treatments and whatnot, and so then we might get down to some other things that I don't study about the human body, and I think women are tougher than men, would be my guess. But I don't know that for sure. So we'll let others speak. Maybe Tom can speak about that at lunch. Okay. Excuse me? Because I don't know why I should repeat
He's starting a war, right?
Hey, and by the way, that's not true in the United States. But anyway, okay, well, we'll let that comment slide. Okay, so I want to spend a little bit of time thinking about what entrepreneurship is. So we're just not going to spend a ton of time, and then we'll do a break, and then we'll kind of come back to some more personal things. But I wanted to not overlook, what is an entrepreneur? How does entrepreneurship fit into the big picture? And so we've been talking about economic development, and other authors think about this being a process. So discovery and technology and all of those things are always in flux. And the reason I say it that way is that the traditional economic model that I did at the very beginning with the production possibilities frontier, it says, what is the maximum amount of food and medical treatments we can produce given the available resources and technology? Like, we freeze time right now and we say this is what we can do. But in reality, that's ever evolving, ever changing. And so I think it's more healthy to think of entrepreneurship in terms of an ever evolving process. So we have competition out there. And I love this. This is from Kersner, who, lured by the scent of profit. I think there's some over here, right? And so I want to make myself and my family as happy as possible. I know that I need to pay the bills to do that, or at least a function of that. Love works too. But it's nice to have love and a nice house and a nice car and be able to eat and drink and be merry, right? So those two things go hand in hand. I don't want to discount one. But an important part of a healthy, vibrant, flourishing economy is to allow people freedom to follow that scent and to discover new ways to put things together that add value not only to their pocketbooks, but as we learned, so I always like to start off with Tom and Jen on the island, when I profit, you profit. In a market-based economy where it's all voluntary, you don't have to buy what I dish up. If you choose to do it, that means you were better off, right? If you paid $1 for something and you weren't forced to pay $1 for something, you must have valued that at $2 or $3 or $1.25. Otherwise, you wouldn't have done it. You have other choices to do with your dollar. You would move to the next person and to the next person. And that's what we mean by these profit opportunities, pockets of market ignorance. So is there places where people don't understand something? Steve Jobs, our founder and maker of our iPhones and a lot of the technology that we enjoy today, was famous for saying, you don't know what you're missing, right? You don't know what you like. Try this, right? So it's kind of this idea he had a vision of how life could be a little bit better, and he was able to dish it up, right? And so that was, in a sense, ignorance. The resource base to make an iPhone, or if we go back to the iPod, to make that technology, those resources were there, right? He didn't invent a new resource. He just figured out a different combination of the existing resource base that created a new product that added value to everybody. So it's like poof, right? It's like magic. It's like adding value all by itself, just by allowing that system to work. All right, so where are those untapped opportunities for specialization in coconuts or in fish, right? Where can we find those things and get the proper network and into those transactions? So the focus that Kersner is an economist that specialized in this entrepreneurship stuff, and he focused in on alertness. So alertness is the thing that we want people to have. When you have an economy that's not functioning very well, and your subsistence level, where do I make my next buck so that I can eat, you're not thinking about profitable opportunities, right? You're not being alert to how you could better serve or better figure out something. And so that alertness factor is where the emphasis is, and we can hopefully make things better off, not only for us, but for other people. So how do we do that if something was earlier overlooked? So somebody hasn't seen something, but you have. We had this, one of the economists characterizes this by, it's like you just found money, right? So if you're alert to profitable opportunities, it's similar to finding a $100 bill on the ground. It's like, oh, what's this? And so economists traditionally haven't tackled entrepreneurship very well. So there's an old joke of, let me just get a little visual going. So I'm kind of a visual guy here. You know, there's a dollar on the floor, and so economist number one just walks by. Economist number two walks by. It's a busy parkway, right? And they're just walking by a dollar. And they finally say, well, they ask the economist, well, why didn't you pick it up? And well, I have to assume that it's fake, otherwise somebody else would have picked it up. Right? If everybody's been passing it by. And that's kind of the economist mentality. So entrepreneurship is different than the way traditional economic models have handled things. And so the entrepreneur can sometimes just have that materialize. So entrepreneurship happens like instantaneously. It's like that aha moment where nothing's changed in the world. The existing resource base is the same, but then all of a sudden, poof, oh, that's a great idea, right? I could do this and add value to other people's lives at a cheaper price, and I make money too. A win-win situation. It's like it just enters in. It's like almost like resources are created, but they're not, right? It's just a new idea. It's an innovation. It's technology. It's information. Okay, so there's three classes that can be categorized of what an entrepreneur does. So pure arbitrage is the idea of, I have a market over here, I can buy in this market and sell tomorrow in this market, right? So I know both markets. I can buy here and sell here. We call that arbitrage. And so arbitrage keeps markets efficient. It's good to have entrepreneurs that are looking for arbitrage opportunities because it keeps prices low. Why are they able to buy in this market and sell over here? Because the market in Zimbabwe or some other place has too high a price. And so there's an opportunity to buy it in this market and sell it here, which then forces the existing sellers in this market to lower their prices. That's competition. So again, having systems in place where we have people looking for arbitrage opportunities helps keep prices efficient. And prices we think of not strong enough for most people. Prices are information that reflect relative scarcity of goods and services and resources in the economy. So prices, when they're high, force us to say, oh, maybe I should try another product, right? And so prices go up and we try something else. It forces a substitution, which keeps the price from maybe coming down. And so I get chills even thinking about prices conveying information around the world, right? And then we have different country currencies and exchange rates, but all of that gets kind of equalized. And so when you want to start your own business, you can go and say, well, am I really adding anything of value or not? You have prices that show the relative scarcity. You don't have to know why copper prices are high right now because of a natural disaster in South America. You just observe copper prices are going up, and so you seek an alternative. So the world tends to adjust itself through pricing through what Adam Smith called the invisible hand of the marketplace. There's no king or queen or central planner or dictator that's saying this, this, or this, but rather through individual voluntary behavior, prices adjust through supply and demand. And then things are kept in check. Those things that are becoming more scarce, maybe an endangered species even, which can run into other problems that markets don't always fix real well, but they can. There can be markets for organs and markets for, we get into animals here with tusks and that sort of thing. So there's been use of markets to try to correct that problem rather than just like banning them. And then we have poachers and other problems that come up. So having prices on things is a marvelous thing that the market provides and creates efficiency in how we can trust people we don't know to do what's best for themselves, and society gets a good outcome from it, right? Society's resources are best utilized when we have an efficient pricing system. Okay, the other class is speculation, and that's just simply buying today, holding it for another time period, and selling it next year. right? So the idea of speculating on something is usually across time periods is the way we're at least characterizing that. And then the one I really want to get to is innovation. This is certainly the most important one, I think. Speculation and arbitrage kind of help keep little variances in prices, kind of the system moving over time, little incremental adjustments of things adjusting. But this is where it gets big. This is where coming up with that new medical treatment that looks and customizes treatments according to their genes can make a big leap forward, right? There can be a huge adjustment in prices and other human elements of living longer and saving lives and less people getting injured. All right, so that is the part we want to think about. And what is entrepreneurship in that capacity? It's something new. Something new, whether it's your new business or new idea. That newness part is the focus of what entrepreneurship is. So the entrepreneurship exercise in innovative production tends to generate technological progress. So by having these things developed time and time again, we start to move the needle forward. Okay, so what do we see in the real world? So I want to make sure that you guys, you brought it up, well, he's gone now, but Elon Musk, we see kind of the owners, and they've got money, and they've got resources, and so is that entrepreneurship? And so we likely see alertness being characterized with resource owners. People who own resources already tend to be the entrepreneurs. But is ownership a prerequisite for entrepreneurship? The answer is no, as we're piecing it out. They might go together, but they don't have to go together. And that's good news for you guys. If you have a breakthrough in your organization, that entrepreneurial discovery can come forward to benefit you and the world without you having many resources. When I was a real estate developer, my then boss and ultimate partner would always say, oh, go to McCullough. He always comes up with the creative ideas, like to solve a problem of some sort. And then people looked, and we were doing multi-million-dollar type deals, and somebody says, well, how did you get the money for that? I'm like, money, that's the easy thing to get. It's the good idea that's hard, right? And so that, to me, was the entrepreneur in me, that it's the knowledge. You can use other pathways to get money and financing and other networks, but to come up with a really great breakthrough novel idea, that's the hard part. So, does the entrepreneurship, does it require control or accumulation of capital? So no, we don't need that. That's why we have investors and financiers and capitalists. They already are rich. They don't want to spend the time and resources or they're not interested in science, right? But they love a new idea that looks like it's going to be profitable. And so we have these, sometimes called angel investors or other people for small startup businesses. That happens. And of course, as I stated earlier, with the lack of multinational companies here, those investors aren't going to be interested in coming to Zimbabwe if it's that out of control with contracts and property rights and the money. You're going to see less and less of that being available. There might be some Zimbabweans that are willing to invest because they're locals. But what I'm talking about is really having the world be your oyster, right? To be able to take advantage of opportunities that might come from other countries. That's going to be more difficult. All right, so how do we, make money? How do we get there? We're going to get into the details of that after we get done with our break, but I wanted to spend time thinking about this. And so here's a quote from this guy saying, entrepreneurship is more about exploiting the new opportunities, inventions, more in the form of marketing and developing them for widespread use than developing the knowledge itself. So we talked about McDonald's earlier. I don't know if you all know the story of McDonald's, but it's kind of an interesting one. It was started by two engineers, and they basically figured out how to make hamburgers really efficiently, right? They were very, the things that we know of consistency, and they developed some equipment. But they were so wrapped up into the technology, and they were doing gangbusters at their one store, but they couldn't see the big picture. And so a guy named Ray Kroc came along and says, I love your hamburgers. I think he was selling milkshake machines to them at the time. And he said, let's bring this to the world. And so ultimately, he's what scaled up McDonald's into being the world franchise that it is today, not the people that originally developed the knowledge itself. And so we need more than just the knowledge to get there. So a person, a real flesh and blood person, might possess both the technical creativity and entrepreneurial alertness, but only the second thing is there to be an entrepreneur. So you have to have the ability to see things more and to think about it. And that's why I wanted to start you guys with where you fit into the global economy. Again, we just kind of scratched the surface on a number of things, but knowing that you might be able to bring something to there can help form your organization and who you want to fit in, maybe even the country that you want to work in. So, how can we help you have entrepreneurial alertness? What are some things that you, as Mr. or Mrs. Scientist, looking through your computer screens, what are some things that would help you to be more alert? What are the things out there that, and I want you to think personally, like, I never thought of myself as an entrepreneur. What are some things that would help you become more alert? And you can think about your particular field. So we heard people speaking yesterday. Beyonce had a wonderful talk, and quite the salesperson. I was going to compliment you later on bringing the Geno Farm, and wouldn't it be great? And you had this awesome sales pitch, right? And so we all have different attributes that we can bring, but how can we become more alert to opportunities? How about one person giving me a nudge? How could you become more alert? Yes?
I think that the starting point is knowing what you can do.
Okay, good.
Skills. What kind of skills do you have?
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of it. So having yourself be able to develop that comparative advantage with your personal skills. But to be an entrepreneur, you can't just stay with your skill set, right? So we need to kind of move, but it does start there. I think that brings you to your job, and now you're working for Pfizer maybe, or some of the major medical places. My son is an engineer in biomedical engineering, and I am 100% confident that kid is going to come up with a whiz-bang idea and start his own business. I'm just almost positive of it. Just what he's done over time, maybe a little bit of after dear old dad or something too, but he is alert to those things. He's always been alert to those things. It was funny, his first 3 months on the job, and they flew him up to this trade show because they didn't have anybody else to go. He outsold the existing salespeople on the sales floor. He just had a natural talent to that, but he knows his product, he knows himself and his skills, knows his product, and then starts to know the industry. Like, how can I create value? Knowing that there's win-win situations. You're not taking advantage of anybody. I hope, at a minimum, you got this from my talk today, that you are not taking advantage of anybody to profit off them if it was voluntary. I don't care if your product's $5,000 or $500 or $5. If somebody came to you and was not forced to buy it, and you had it at $5,000 and you only had cost of $1,000, and you feel a little guilty because you made $4,000, I'm like, okay. I'm saying don't feel guilty. Don't feel guilty, and I'm serious. A lot of people have problems with that. If you're a good person and you know whether you're a good person or not, what are you going to do with that $4,000? Reinvest it into something else, right? Maybe you'll go buy a car too. Right? You can do what you want with it. But if you're an entrepreneur, you'll be real tempted to reinvest it into yourself and into your business, and you'll expand and you'll hire another person, right? And so don't ever feel embarrassed to make some money if it was not through coercion or fraud or any other deception. If you made money, you helped that person. You didn't hurt them at all. They don't need to know how much money you made either. You don't have to be that transparent. But they were willing to pay $6,000 for that item you just sold for $5,000, right? Win-win situation. They made $1,000. Sometimes I've done these big deals, And we both walk away like, oh, I kind of got the best of that person. And each person's thinking the same thing, because you both win, right? That's the whole point. And so we need to look for those opportunities about how we can fit our product or our thing into the bigger picture. And that's the alertness part. So my recommendation to all of you, if you haven't been doing this, which Colin told me you're not, and they said these kids, they've been in a science book for 10, 15 years, ever since they're 11. Science, experiment, screen, academic journal, whatever. So you've been here. I want you to just kind of look up and look around and really think about what is the medical industry like, not only in Zimbabwe, but in other countries. You know, what would this look like? You guys hear about rich Americans paying a lot for medical services, and that's true, but do you really understand the difference that an American might be paying $100 for some drug, and you guys produce it for $1, some new discovery, and maybe you help out some poor Zimbabwe and sell it for $2, you double it. But don't stop there. If you know the market and you maybe start to develop some connections, sell it to the Americans for $100, make $99 on that drug. Absolutely, right? And think about you bringing that $99 back to Zimbabwe and the things that you can do with that money and keep it going. So we're thinking about a process that's long-term, being alert to the industry and the markets, but you are specialized. As you were saying, you're specialized in the knowledge that you have, but then you got to go a couple layers out and think about, well, where is this going from here? And then what do the other market opportunities look like?
When you put it like that, it sounds very simple. But in actual sense, I think all these students and other staff members would agree with me that we've come to a point where we have a set of products or services that we've developed. But we're still stuck. You come to our workplaces, a number of stuff that we can talk about, that we have produced, isn't it? But we're still stuck. We're not making money yet.
Yeah.
No, it's the competencies that transitions us from this position to what you're talking about.
Yeah.
That's relating. I think that's where we're coming short.
Yeah. And I think part of that, at least, is understanding and knowing that a person like Steve Jobs, you take any of them, any big entrepreneur, and you think about the product that they made. They had 1,000 other things that failed. And so it's that kind of process that it's not just a one and done. If you've done 5 things and they've had some mild successes, you keep going. And part of that is the hope of the $1 thing and for $99. Or the flip side of that, by the way, by opening yourself up to the global economy, is the $1 cost, the $2 sale, but you're doing it to 1 million people, right? So that's the other thing with volume and scaling up, is that the profit margins can be smaller, but you're selling it to millions. And that's where, of course, people like Steve Jobs and some other people have been successful, is that they found a product that was generalizable to a mass market, right? The average person. Whereas some of the things that we learned about yesterday in your lab is only cancer treatments, right? And so now we start thinking, we start having, like, how many cancer treatments are going on in a given year, right? And then we can start to estimate the type of impact and that it might have and the scope and reach that it might have. So you might have oh my gosh, we came up with the most marvelous change, and there's 2 people with this disease, right? And so what are you going to do? Sell it for $500,000 per pill to each person? No, you can't. You can't be done. So that can also help direct a little bit on your focus areas. So you would not want to focus all of your research into the thing that helps these small populations. At least be diversified. It might be interesting things to look at, but when you think about the limited resources at your disposal, having the profit incentive and understanding and being alert to those bigger markets will help direct your attention of your resources a little fractionally anymore to those potentially high probable wins versus the lower probable ones. And so part of it, the amount of effort and the research and the science and all of that is equal across the spectrum, right? And so we might look for things that would have a more profitable opportunity. And then we got to learn how to protect our property rights and stuff so that I have the whiz-bang idea. Don't go publish it in a scientific journal. I know you'll look really good to all your buddies, but you just gave the knowledge out, right? So we gotta. So this is part of entrepreneurship too. Is like, how do I protect the property? I mean, you guys might come to a point where you have to really think about that. Who knows? You had a whiz-bang idea in the lab, and you're like, okay, maybe we shouldn't, publish this in the paper or shout out a loud horn. Who knows this? How protected is the data? And really be thinking about your property rights and whether, and then you have to know local customs and the rule of law. Are there protections if somebody copies it? Can you sue them? And again, these are some of the luxuries we have in the United States, that intellectual property has been protected and cherished, whereas we have copycats around the world that way too.
So, I'm just wondering, is it also not wise to know when to let go of something? As scientists, is it not an entrepreneurial skill as well?
It
to
is.
just understand that this is not you.
Yeah.
It is, you stop here and somebody has to take it from there, or you have to hire services of another person. Because why I'm saying that, scientists always think they have a lot of important things. But how do you define important in the grand scheme of things?
Yeah.
Take for example, sweets, they're not important, but they sell.
The what?
They sell.
No,
Candy.
what did you say the word?
Sweets.
Oh, sweets.
Yeah, you
Candy.
can survive without candy.
Yeah, yeah.
But it sells.
Yeah.
So with scientists, if we come, in our world it's important, but out there is it as important as it is in the
Yeah.
lab bank, or is it as important as it is into the scientific
Yeah.
community? Again, if you discover something, if you treat it because you're going to make money, if somebody gives you to it and publishes it in a journal, we are doing it something. So how do you balance that
Yeah.
science and entrepreneurship?
Yeah, and I can't answer that directly because I think it's going to be very circumstantial on how that. So sometimes getting it published actually protects your property rights to it. You might not have all the secrets to how it works exactly, right? You can publish results, and this is how we got, but the actual way it happens is proprietary, right? It's yours. And again, that's kind of thinking more like an entrepreneur rather than a scientist. The scientist, then you might think, oh, I'm going to show everybody, and somebody says, oh, you didn't really get that result. And I'm like, well, I can prove it. Here's my equations. Here's all my data. You can, and part of science is that, right? That when you get published, other scientists can replicate it. That's part of the business. But that's where having the entrepreneurial mindset can make a difference. Now, if you're already very comfortable with your life and your income, and you realize, I just want to benefit society, I don't care that I gave up a $2 billion idea. That's not me, but I know some of you in here think that way, which is fine. But I mean, that's your choice. That's the beauty of the marketplace, is that I want to be your friend. I will be your Ray Kroc or your McDonald's, right? And so I want to have lunch with you and learn about what you're doing. And so maybe you can still get a cut of the action that way. And that's kind of like partnering and letting other people do some different parts of it. Some people are going to be more talented in other areas. But yeah, I think if money is important, because it'll allow you to grow AIVST to the new level, to the vision that's there, you have to make choices to stay on task of what's going to be able to fund the bills. If we have a goal of 5 years from now being able to build the campus to this level, where's that going to come from? Right? And so all of a sudden then it forces you to really think hard about that. And so yes, those trade-offs are there, and I think the average scientist is just thinking about the next journal publication. How can I push the envelope of knowledge? Again, the envelope of knowledge, you might have got a sweet journal article citation in a top journal for that thing that helped the 2 people, right? But you spent the same amount of time somebody else did with helping out 1 million people that could then be marketed and sold. And so it's just something that needs to be brought out through the organization. And so if there is an objective of earning money, then you got to be thinking that way. If the objective is we're all, and there's lots of rich American scientists, so there's plenty of people that are just thinking about moving the envelope of knowledge. But when you visit countries like this, there's more to that. And now we've shown that there's nothing wrong with that, and you're going to help other people have more food by profiting well new whiz-bang idea. Okay, anything else? Yeah.
So would I be right then in saying, in as much as you produce quite a number of products or services, you then want to put them, all of them, through a stage gate kind of procedure?
Through what?
A stage gate procedure, which is sort of an evaluation procedure.
Oh, sure.
It's before wasting time and resources on the product that one will be.
Yeah, and I think that's where bringing partners on board could, so, different types of partnerships where maybe you do have a trusted person that you ultimately want to do business. When I first heard what AIBST has done, I was sold on Colin, and you can't help but be infected with his enthusiasm and passion, and I was like, well, that makes perfect sense. I know nothing about genes and I know nothing about vaccines, but I know what you're doing makes perfect sense, and you could probably make a lot of money on it if you came up with the right thing. So having enough people that you can then, maybe it's in certain areas of certain cancer or certain disease, that can then do the legwork of analyzing the industry and the market. I think some of that could be done ahead of time, though, in terms of alertness, to say, how many people suffer from this disease around the world, right? And that could be something that's, a morning meeting or something, or a luncheon, that you guys have a little bit of that infused into your scientists, that to keep them in the process of thinking about what does the industry look like, here are some changes, not just on the science side, but on the business side. And I think that would be a healthy thing to do if your objectives is, this growth and you need to attract funds that way. Yes?
I think one of the challenges that the scientific community needs to appreciate is our ego. We tend to think that we are more important than we actually are. And you see it sometimes in particular areas where people who did significant things surrender to someone else because they know that this person can grow this thing to a bigger thing. I'm not sure if Elon Musk has not built Tesla before, that Tesla would be what it is today. But everyone thinks that Elon Musk founded Tesla, but he didn't. We learned from a couple of guys that are doing some great work. And if we did not, they did not have that mentality to appreciate that maybe we can't go further than where we have gone so far. Perhaps, Tesla would die in another national thing, a number of corporations would die. So sometimes we need to strike that balance. We come up with a particular project, we come up with a particular technology, but we need to appreciate that to reach the next level. I'm a person, it's a lot of space for this particular thing. Let me hand it over, let me channel it this way. Let me appreciate the backseat role, that kind of thing. And I know there was a comment about knowing when to give up, but it's sometimes tricky. When you follow the fidget spinner, that toy that was really popular some years ago, it was not invented in this era. It was invented way back. And the patent was held by a particular lady for a long time, and she gave it up. She stopped sustaining the patent. And then another corporation came and goes, this stressful era, this thing would lead to the market. And they took up the patent and kept the market. And the original inventor got nothing from it. So we need to be cautious, when to go, when to hold on, and things like to do.
Yeah, and there's other pathways to do too. So really it comes down to a risk-reward trade-off. And so everybody has their own risk tolerance. And so do I want to stick around and do what Elon Musk did with all of that? The answer for a lot of scientists and other people would be no. And so then what other pathways can you explore? Licensing or other ways to make money off of it, as opposed to just publishing the results and giving them away for free. Right? And so again, you're still thinking about different ways that it could be structured, and maybe full-blown partnering in with the venture is not the right thing for AIBST or other organizations. But having explored that ahead of time and knowing what the opportunities are for sales or licensing or other ways that you can generate profits from it. The problem is, if it's always hindsight 2020. If you came up with $1 billion idea, $1 billion thing, but there was a lot of work Elon Musk had to do ahead of time, and you didn't want to partake in it, you might have to sell that idea for just a lousy $1 million, right? Which is like, $1 million, I'll take it, But Now, hindsight 2020, you're like, oh, maybe I should have been along for the ride. But that might not be the right choice. My PhD economics professor taught me an important lesson about decision making, and you can't judge a decision ex post, only ex ante. And so ex post is Latin for after the fact. You can't judge a decision after the fact. Like, oh, that was a bad decision or that was a good decision. No. It might have been a perfect decision with a bad outcome, right? So the decision, the important part of the decision is when you made it, were you rational about it? Did you reason? Did you take the time to hire or explore all the avenues associated with it, and you've evaluated the risk and you decided not to do it, which was the right decision? It turned out to be $1 billion deal, but there's no way you could have known it because you did all your homework ahead of time. So you can only judge decisions before the fact, ex ante, of whether they were good decisions or not, and not kick yourself later. Even though it's human nature, we're going to kick ourselves anyway. But the truth of the matter is that's not really correct to do that. And so that's part of what I think we have to get from entrepreneurial alertness is that let's make sure we've squeezed out all the information relevant to whether I should take this pathway, or this pathway. And then, given everything that you've done, you've bounced it off enough people, maybe taking the $1 million was a great move for you at that time, and then just let it go. But that's going to depend on what your particular resource mix is and the other people and stakeholders associated with it. I see another hand up? Yeah.
I also think that entrepreneur learn this by reading lines and understanding the trends of what is happening.
Yeah. So keeping current with the industry or other things, right? Yeah, and that can direct, I was kind of mentioning this a little bit earlier, that can direct the paths that you're choosing to take, too, is that you see an emerging area of some sort, and now you understand that, and so you don't take a declining area. Even though maybe the declining area, oh, that would be so much fun to do, deal with that particular sector, and it's appealing to you, and it's where your natural interests are, you might go this other pathway knowing that there's more opportunities for profitability. So, and sometimes I'm speaking the wrong, I've always been very money motivated. So it's easy for me to look back and let the money lead the way. I'll do this. You want me to do this? I'll do this. And you kind of just, the sense of profit was really strong for me as a young man, and I've learned to get, that there's other things in life, but I was always very money motivated. But now as an economist, some of the things I was just telling you about the pricing system and all of that, is that if you're in tune with that, that can help guide you as well. So depending on your motivations, if money, that's what I was saying earlier, if money means nothing to you, God bless you. I mean, that's fine. You can, whatever conditions you're in, if you know you have a stable income and you're comfortable with life, then go do the scientific discovery that means nothing to most people and a lot to a few people, right? It's just not going to be very marketable, but that's fine if that's the position you're in. I'm not gonna say that's wrong. It's perfectly fine. That's what I love about voluntary markets, without the government telling us what to do or forcing us to move a certain direction. They always put a positive spin. Well, we're going to dedicate $10 billion to, science. And I'm like, well, that's great for whoever got that grant, but I don't care about that particular study. And maybe having the private sector be able to explore that stuff would come up with some good results as well. We don't always know that. And so we start to kind of have this mentality that government-directed things might be somehow better, or that's the direction. And unfortunately, I suspect that would be a little bit of the culture here and in other places where the government has a heavier hand. The pathway to prosperity as a 10-year-old and a 15-year-old and an 18-year-old is, I got to get a government job. If I want to do something, we got to go ask the government for money, right? And we have to, so all of a sudden, culturally, it's different. It's not the entrepreneurial mindset. It's what economists call the rent-seeking mindset of, I need to rely on somebody else to get me the money. It's not in my control. There's somebody else that I have to rely on. Whereas the entrepreneur says, I just come up with the idea, and I've got lots of possibilities of people who would want to make money off of this, and I can partner with them or find some other pathway. So that cultural thing is difficult to break too. And that's why I said it takes a long time, sometimes a generational type of thing before some economies really start to see the fruits of economic freedom and allowing individuals to do what's best for themselves ultimately leads to these great outcomes for society. Okay, any other questions? Yeah, follow up? Yeah.
I also think that at times we need exposure to what is happening in other countries, and particularly in the area of our domain, and also get the role of which scientists have made progress and who are also now intrapreneur in their areas.
Yeah.
What are the innovations that are currently ongoing which we can borrow and apply to our current situation? For example, you will notice that when it came to the genomic sequencing, in the early days it was a very expensive process. But now you can do it at a very low cost, less than $100. And if once you are able to ascertain the need to provide a service where we are applying genomic sequencing, then it means that we have a larger market with little or no competition.
Yeah. So we hit what economists call economies of scale, where something that was very expensive now appeals to the masses, and so the average cost per unit goes down. When you talk about learning, I think we are in such a great position now. I mean, to me, one of the exciting things about helping countries that have high degree of poverty is the cell phone and the innovations. We've talked about Elon Musk at least a handful of times already, but how about the SpaceX, the link? If we have internet service around the globe, I mean, that's the vision for that. If you're way off in rural Africa somewhere, you can be sitting in a hut and have internet service and learn what the trends are in gene therapy and other things, right? And so that information and technology and communication revolution has been enormous, and we haven't even seen all of the benefits of that yet. Having phone banking on your phone and protection of property that's there. You guys no longer, if we have something like Bitcoin and some other things come about, you no longer have to rely on the Federal Reserve, or the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, and the leaders here to be irresponsible. You just start trading in Bitcoin, right? All of a sudden, you've got sound money overnight. Now, we're not there yet. We're not there to it being sound money, but I'm still a believer it's going to come. I think I predicted 10 years, 2 or 3 years ago, that Bitcoin will become money. Right now, it's just a speculative asset. I wouldn't say to invest in it. I have a little bit in there because I think long term it is going to work. But it's not money at this point where it's generally accepted as a medium of exchange, the way US dollars are here in Zimbabwe. I hope it'll get there because now, again, we have that available all over the world. So we've got information. The other thing I haven't touched on is transportation advances over the last 30 years, these container ships. So part of what plagued Central Africa is getting to the coast, right? If you guys had great products or great ideas or other things, your ability to get somewhere was very difficult. And so now shipping containers and other advances in technology as we move into drones and other delivery devices, you can communicate and do business with the rest of the world much easier than you could 20, 30 years ago. So all of those things, I think, help you stay in the loop with information and your ability to transact with the world. Okay, anything else? Yes?
I just want to comment on something. Let's assume kind of identify the need in the US and technology skills to solve the problem. Then some solving then it gets kind of
because of the problems with government type of issues. Yeah. Yeah. Well,
can you repeat the question, Russ?
Yeah, so the question was, if I'm in Africa and I have a business and I transact, I've got a relationship maybe with somebody in the United States and we have a business and we make a product and then we go to ship it and we can't ship it because of regulations, restrictions, or corruption in your particular country to get things out of the country. And I'm not sure that's going to go away very fast. And so one of the my responses to that is that this technology and innovation with phones and other things allows you to provide your services much better to the rest of the world, where you're not physically shipping a product. And so I don't think the answer to prosperity in Africa is building products as much as it is your brains. I see lots of smart people in here. I heard lots of smart things going on. So you can effectively export your knowledge and brains and services much easier today than you could before, because we're not relying on a mediator in between, the communication company. I can get that out, and I just learned today, I guess you have some, maybe one of the major cell phone rich people, I don't know if there's more than one, but not having to rely on that Elon Musk has a satellite system, and you can sit in rural Africa and transact, come up with a discovery, and be compensated through that with Bitcoin. It doesn't flow through the central bank. Imagine what the world is. It's really changing at a fast way. And so I don't think the problem that you're highlighting exists in other countries. Guatemala is one of them. But I don't think the answer lies there anyway, so that's kind of good news. I think the physical production of goods will continue to be a little more local, because as you add that transportation cost anyway, you're not able to deliver it as easily. Now, if a drone comes over and drops into your rural place in Africa, picks up the stuff and leaves airspace, who knows? That could become less and less of a problem in the future as well. Okay? Other things. Yes?
I think for me, my answer is going to be on the online trading. Maybe just in the background, I have the innovation on medical, online innovation, where I upload medical guidelines, clinical updates, and frequent asked questions. Then it's all online on desktop. But I'm receiving a lot of emails for other people who want to work with me or improve it so that they get marketed. But usually I don't even reply, because I don't know who is genuine. How can I check this company is genuine or not? So maybe she can.
Oh, that's interesting. So you might want to think about the problem a little bit differently, in that if they were genuine, how else would they contact you? Do you have other modes? So if that ends up being the first thing, it might be, I'm a fisherman, as some of you have learned, and we're going to do some fishing. It might just be throwing a line up, right? You're not sure if you're going to get a nibble or a hit, but you could kind of test the waters to see if there's legitimacy to that. And so you might be able to ask the right questions quickly so that you don't waste too much time on it too. That sounds interesting of what you're saying with marketing. Tell me more about yourself, or whatever. And again, this is going to cost time, so you kind of have to use your judgment on how much time you want to devote to it, because there are scams and other things that, of course, you don't want to waste your time on. But it might be the way somebody genuine wants to do. So when I say phishing, you maybe got 20 emails. 19 of them are garbage and scams and whatever. But just that one got a hit, right? And so that one hit could be huge, right? If you all of a sudden, my wife does these some nonprofit stuff, and it is some material things in Guatemala with garments. And she got all of a sudden one of those emails from, her name is Gaines. She's kind of has a popular show and does housing products, and so it's a huge hit. And they're talking about ordering like 3,000 towels. Well, most orders of towels are 50, right? And so one of those lines could end up being a big opportunity. And so I think having that entrepreneurial mindset, knowing that there's going to be 19 failures and maybe one success, and maybe it's 99 failures and one success. But depending on how much time you have to devote for that, it might be worth it. And so you might just have to come up with a process that's not too burdensome to try to see what they're saying. Because it sounds like you came up with something very novel. And when you do come up with something novel, people recognize that. And they're like, oh, I could use that. And they might not know how well organized you are or you aren't, right? They just see, oh, that is a really interesting idea. They don't know maybe if you're a big corporation or a 50-person employee or 100 or it's just you. in your bed before nighttime and you're doing all your work until midnight, right? They don't know. And so it would be, I think, good to think about how many resources to devote towards that activity. And because there can be these large wins that might not be on your minds. When I brought up my build it for 1,000 or cost of 1,000 and sell it for 5,000, those exist. I mean, there's reasons why we have people that hit it big. And so in some places, the opportunities are less, and that's what the whole economic freedom bit is about, is that might be more difficult in some countries than others, but it's still there, and it's improving in general in our global marketplace, that there be, if you have a really novel idea, there is people in the United States, they're gonna be concerned, like, what's your inflation in Zimbabwe? I've never visited, I've never heard of your country before. Whoa, right? And, you have to deal with that. But there might be, I think in your case, compared to the last question, you are exporting a service, right? And whether it's web design or the knowledge that you're packaging together, all of that stuff. And so it's real easy for you to sell that around the world, potentially. So you might be sitting on a little nugget that's much bigger than what you think, and so allow some of those testing, do a little fishing. Yes? Yeah, so there's no doubt.
You repeat the question?
That entrepreneurs are risk takers, and so you need to take on a little bit of that risk to do it. And so you've probably heard the stories where you might have a comfortable job that's paying $20,000 a year, but to start your own business, there's no guarantee of any income, right? And so that's working out of your garage, like Steve Jobs did, and multiple other entrepreneurs. That can be a difficult thing to do, and so I think learning about those other pathways again that I mentioned earlier, that maybe you don't have to quit your comfortable job and go start your own business. That might not be in your DNA, but it might be in somebody else's DNA. And so let's try to structure a partnership of some form to where, maybe 80% of the win goes to the risk taker who really did the stuff I didn't want to do, but I still get a little sliver of 20%, right, or something like that. So it's this risk-reward trade-off. Hopefully you're not going to say, hindsight 2020, oh, I should have done a 50-50 partnership, or I should have kept it to myself. That you really thought long and hard, and having those conversations earlier and starting to develop the entrepreneurial mindset will allow you to do that a little easier, and to understand better the risks that you may or may not be taking, because you know that you've discovered something valuable to others. But it might not be the right thing for you in your time and place. Okay? Any other questions? Yes?
Yeah, so this question I don't know how I can but the question I'm asking is that so entrepreneurs can be taught on how to be entrepreneurs, or they are just those that are born as entrepreneurs?
Yeah. No, there's quite a bit of literature on that. If it's a nature versus nurture, and so the good news is, if it's not in your nature to be that risk taker, it can be nurtured a little bit. So it's definitely not a either or. It is something that there's skills to be developed. Some of those skills are just evaluating risk. Like sometimes you might be afraid of something that you shouldn't be afraid of. So learning those outcomes, learning about what other people have done, knowing your industry. So that's one of the most important things where most entrepreneurial activity occurs, is within your specialized world. I mean, it's just amazing to listen to stories of people who work in different businesses and different industries, and it's some of the dumbest things you could ever imagine, like a transistor that helps move current from here to here, and it's got some special device that restricts it, and there's a little resistor or restrictor or something. I'm just, by the way, making this up completely as I go. But all of a sudden, that can be used in multiple appliances around the world, right? And it's like, it's the simplest little thing, but it needed to be done. And so recognizing the value of that is important. Developing those skills on how to build a team. So I think that comes in kind of some of the leadership areas of knowing that you are skilled with science maybe, but how can I surround myself with people that complement these other things that will bring entrepreneurship to the forefront. And so finding people with different skill sets and building that team is another thing that can be learned, right? And can be an important attribute. But the bottom line is the way entrepreneurship is described with what I did, it's that aha moment. It really can't be trained. Like that discovery is just there. You can kind of train yourself to try to be more alert, but we can't hire an entrepreneur. So this guy is kind of famous for like, I'm just going to hire an entrepreneur and we'll come up with the next $1 billion thing. Doesn't work that way, right? Entrepreneurship just emerges through the knowledge that's concentrated. Some of that knowledge is unimportant to most people around the world that you have about the process of how to do something. And so the fact that you can recognize an improvement all of a sudden creates that aha moment, and all of a sudden, whew, there's the dollar bill in your hand, right? And so that's the discovery part, the entrepreneurial, and I should say the entrepreneurial discovery, not just the scientific discovery, but the ability to think, I know that can add value to other people's lives and to my life as well.
So can I add to that?
Yes. Dr. DeWall, I need to drink water anyway.
So think about, again, how long entrepreneurship has actually been around. The definition came back in 1795. It was a French definition to start with. That's where the word came from. But the bottom line is, even as late as 1983, we did not talk about entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship. That has been literally in the last 30 years. So if there weren't entrepreneurs before the early 80s, what was it? What were they? They're small business owners. And so if you think about, we've had small business owners since inception of time. I mean, go back to Greeks and Romans and everybody else. They were small business owners. They were highly entrepreneurial, but we didn't call it that. So I think in a lot of my research and stuff, the argument can be made that I think the word intimidates, and in reality, you're just starting a small business, which has been done since the ages of the beginning. So if you think you can't be entrepreneurial, then go back and say, how do I start the small business with a unique idea? It's the same thing. And so that innateness versus that other, there are people that start small businesses all the time that never ever think of themselves as entrepreneurs, but are probably some of the most entrepreneurial people in the world. So I agree with everything that Russ is saying, but I take it one step further, if that makes sense. And oftentimes I think it's semantics that scares people, and that word scares a lot of people. So if it scares you, just say, oh, I'm going to start my small business, and you're going to be doing the exact same thing. Does that help a little bit?
Other questions or comments? I really want to end today, since I have a little more time. I didn't know how much of this we were going to do, is just to think about economic decision making, because it really is entrepreneurial decision making, it's life decision making. Should I brush my teeth this morning? You didn't know that, but that's an economic decision. Should I brush my teeth this morning? Right? And so how can we think about the economic decision making as to just simply analyze what the status quo is, and then look at the potential choice at hand, and look at the benefits and the cost of that choice. And so economists call this marginal analysis, and I'd like to challenge all of you to start doing this every moment of your life, roughly. That's probably too burdensome, but I can't escape this way of thinking. And so again, in terms of training your alertness and training your business sense and other things, I think it starts with this premise, and that is simply to look at the marginal benefits and marginal cost. So marginal benefits are simply the incremental benefits that you'll receive from making that decision. What's going to come my way in terms of the benefits associated with that action? So I talked about brushing my teeth. So what are the benefits? Well, hopefully I won't go see the dentist. I'll keep my teeth over the long haul, right? And so my breath will smell well for people that I'm nearby, and so I don't want them giving me the stink eye. So there's a lot of benefits that go in, both monetary and non-monetary benefits. So of course, when we start talking about business, we can focus in on the monetary benefits. So I come up with a new product, and it's a new treatment, and I think that this can be sold for $50 per dose, and I think there's $100,000 worth of market out there of people that need this type of treatment. And so I do the math, and I come up with a money that's coming into my organization, right? So the benefit in that case would be total revenue, right? The total amount of money in the cash register. But to get that money in the cash register, you have to have some costs go out the door, right? So you have to spend some money to make some money. And so that brings us to the other thing we need to analyze very carefully, and that is my marginal costs. And that is both monetary and non-monetary costs. The monetary cost is pretty easy. That's an accounting exercise. So Colin talked about the cost of maintaining the equipment in the lab to the tune of about $20,000 per year. So when they're doing budgeting, they need to be thinking about that $20,000 that's going to need to be done to offset. So we need to be collecting funds from somewhere to, at a minimum, pay that type of ongoing cost. But there's also non-monetary costs involved with some of our actions. And so we've kind of talked about that a little bit today with when do I stop doing this activity and doing others. So the whole idea of opportunity cost is that if you are doing something, you're not doing something else, right? And so sometimes that can have a monetary value with it, but sometimes it's hard to estimate that monetary value. If I go to work today, it's less time that I'm going to spend with my kids. And so maybe what is the next best thing that I would be doing? To be carefully analyzing your next best alternatives, both in monetary and non-monetary costs, is an important process in the decision making. As an economist, I like to think we can put a price tag on just about anything. So we think about, well, you're not spending time with the kids. Well, they'll be fine, right? Or maybe, what does it cost me? So let's see, now they grow up to be thugs, and they get thrown in jail, and then I'm going to have to bail them out of jail, and then they're, whatever. So somehow we can at least place something that might come from the heart, but you might, in some cases, be able to actually estimate roughly with some uncertainty some sort of monetary cost. So you can internalize it some way and add up that cost. So one of the things with both of these that is especially relevant for the entrepreneur and business person is that we don't have a crystal ball. And so we can make a spreadsheet look really good. $50 per pill times 100,000 pills gives me this amount of money. Yay! And then this amount of money minus the 20,000 of maintenance fees and minus the employee costs. I'm making this, right? But of course, we all know that there's a lot of uncertainty embodied in that. And so one of the art forms is to try to deal with uncertainty. And so in some of the classes that we explore with our students, we can develop different ways to deal with uncertainty. The probabilities of certain outcomes, or different strategies to minimize risk or to maximize revenues. So there's lots of different ways academically to deal with that too. So the important part here is that when we're doing a decision of should I move forward or should I not, every decision in life will be efficient if you always think about this. This is the secret sauce. It'll be efficient. It might not be fair or equitable, but it'll be efficient if we follow this logic. So if the expected marginal benefit of taking an action like brushing my teeth is greater than or equal to the expected marginal cost, do it. If not, don't. Every incremental move. Should we go out to Nando's tonight for chicken? Well, what are the expected benefits? What are the expected costs? Right? You know, should the boss take us out for chicken? Well, if I take him out for chicken, we're going to lose progress in the lab, right? So we're going to lose some of our results. They're probably going to hit dead ends tonight anyway, so maybe it's not going to be a monetary cost, right? There's not too much loss. Whatever your circumstances are, you're at least thinking about it. I am trapped in this mindset. Sometimes I'd like to break out, but I found it to be very useful in moving forward. So, you know, should I brush my teeth this morning? Well, that answer changes, doesn't it, from day to day? I like to tell my students this before class, like, the answer is yes most days. Why? Well, brushing my teeth takes about a minute, right? Maybe 2 minutes if you follow the recommended scrubbing, but whatever. You've got some toothpaste, you've got the toothbrush, it takes a minute. But if you just woke up and your alarm class starts at 9 and it's 8:59 and it's a 3-minute walk to class, all of a sudden the cost of brushing your teeth goes up if you've been struggling or if you know that professor's going to dock you points. So don't brush your teeth that way, right? So the thing that I normally do every time I think I'm weighing out the costs and benefits of that particular decision, most days I'm going to brush my teeth, but that particular day the costs or the expected costs were greater than the benefits, so I ran out the door putting some clothes on and I made it to class and hopefully got the points and credibility with my professor because I wasn't too late. So every decision kind of boils down to that. Once you start to have that mindset, then it becomes easier and easier to apply that to business. You know, should we explore another disease or in the lab, right? Should I pursue this? Well, what are the expected benefits? What are the expected costs? Now, maybe you'll start to look beyond the publication value or that it's your personal interest with it. Because you might think I have 2 or 3 areas to study. One of them might have higher expected benefits in terms of it being a profitable opportunity. And so this helps guide you in those decisions as well. So all decisions in life will be efficient thinking about it that way. You might still do the thing you wanted to do or the thing that interests you the most or whatever. At least you've thought about it, right? And so now, how are decisions judged? Ex ante, before the fact. You've thought through all of the expected incremental benefits and incremental costs. The reason why I say some of that is that the business owner might think, oh, we've got the building, and so we got to be profitable, we got to bring in a certain amount of month because I have $300 in rent to pay per month for this facility. Well, your decision of what to do that day is totally independent of your rent. You've already committed to a 1-year lease. You have to pay that cost. That doesn't belong in this decision. The rent payment of what you do today, what are today's activities for me and my employees, is independent. We don't want to take, well, if I take today's activities and it's $300 in rent and there's 30 days in a month, 300 divided by 30 is 10, so I'm going to have $10 entered into this equation. That's not rational, efficient way of thinking. The rent has to be paid anyway, right? So that particular cost should be ignored, and you're only sticking to the cost you can control today. So the benefits of moving my workforce this direction today, what are the benefits, what are the costs? It doesn't involve the rent. And so we start to be able to partition, and this is an area where I would have liked to have gone into today even a little bit more, with variable costs and fixed costs and kind of the right things that go into the decision criteria. And so thinking that way can help you make better moves, not only at home, but at your business and in your work life and in your studies to go on to your PhD. Should I do this today? Should I study an extra hour? I didn't even get into the law of diminishing returns, right? What is the incremental value? I've got 3 different courses that I need to study for. Should I do this course? Should I do this course? Or should I do this course? I've already spent 5 hours in this course. If I spend an additional 6th hour, the expected benefits of an additional hour after I've already spent 5 hours is not very much for the incremental benefit to my grade in that course. Where I haven't even started studying for the other course, and so the incremental gains for 1 more hour of study on that particular course are huge. So stop studying for that course, quit freaking out about it, go study for the other course. Now all of a sudden I'm using this marginal analysis to make efficient decisions because I'm thinking about the expected benefits from where I'm at today. Where are you right now? And now you're moving forward. You're forgetting about the past. I like to think of it as windshield work, driving a car. I'm looking forward. What things can I change today to make myself better off? And it's always at the margin. So marginal analysis is an important part, not only in business, but in life. So with that, any questions? Are we about ready to wrap? I see Regis is gone. Happy to talk, and maybe that's a good idea. We can just let the conversation continue. I can stay up here for a little bit, otherwise you guys can stretch. But my understanding is we've got lunch coming up here in 5 minutes. Is that right? Have I got my timing right, first of all? Okay. What time is it? Yeah, 5 minutes. Okay, perfect. All right, thank you very much, and I'll be happy to chat with you individually on things as we move through the day, and we'll have my contact information and some of the information that I've